So today on the show, I have Patrick Fox, and welcome to the show, Patrick.
Hey, thank you, Kathryn. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you. So Patrick is a life coach, and he's the host of the Alcohol Rethink podcast. So Patrick, I wanted to have you on the show to talk about an addiction to alcohol because I know a lot of people who struggle with binging or other habits also can have problems with alcohol. So you're my alcohol expert, and I would like you just to start by introducing yourself and tell the listeners how you got into this work.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Kathryn, and thank you for having me on the show. And yeah, Patrick Fox. I stopped drinking myself a good few years ago, got coming up to 5 years, and it kind of led me on a journey of rediscovery. And I say rediscovery because I kind of had been into personal development for many years before, but once I stopped drinking, really started to create a lot more awareness in myself and started to think about what I wanted to do with my life. And then that led me back into coaching, which is something I'd already done previously. But whilst I was drinking, it felt very incongruent to be,
Mhm.
working with people and their lives. And then here was I just struggling every weekend. So, yeah. And then since stopping drinking, started working with men, especially who want to stop drinking or radically rethink alcohol.
Yeah.
That's led me to where I am today.
That's great. That's awesome. Um, Maybe we could go back a little bit and talk about your own personal journey. So you said you stopped drinking 5 years ago. When did drinking become a problem for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it, it'd probably been a more of a problem. It'd probably been a problem for a lot longer than I really thought it was, to be
Mhm.
quite honest. And I think that's very, very common, right? Like sometimes you don't even recognize it's really a problem. And for me, I stopped about, yeah, like coming up to 5 years. But before that, I'd probably been on and off for about maybe 5, 6 years of wanting to stop or certainly cut back a lot, and just found that I was just going through that process of like a day here, a day there, maybe a week, but then it just quickly lead back to it. And so the reason I saw it or recognized it as a problem was like, do you know what? I can't even remember the last weekend that I didn't have a drink of alcohol. And I started becoming very conscious of that. And I was like, okay, I don't think that really works for me. And I had lots of fitness goals at the time as well. And so I knew alcohol was inhibiting those, but I didn't want to admit it to myself. Like I was very reluctant to go, no, I can't just be alcohol, right? Like there's got to be all these other things. So yeah, I kind of like went on this stop-start journey of trying to stop, but getting limited results.
Yeah, I think it's very culturally perpetuated too, as far as like you said you thought it wasn't really a problem. I think that's a lot to blame on the culture, like because drinking is such a part of what people do and when they go out on weekends, and it's almost like if you don't drink, people think you have a problem.
Yeah, 100%. Like society has a lot to answer for. I was speaking to someone the other day. Like you often see like these posts about like alcohol promises you this, that, and the other, right? Like it promises you more confidence, or it promises you to be stressed. It's like the reality is, alcohol doesn't promise you anything, right? Like it's literally just a drink. The promises or the false beliefs are actually coming from our society, and exactly what you're saying, right? Like because of just the way that we live our lives, and it's just ingrained into absolutely everything, certainly in Western culture for sure, right? Like birthdays, weddings, funerals, kids' parties, right? Like I used to get excited about my kids' parties, but it's sad because it wasn't the parties I was excited for. It was getting pissed and getting all my mates around at the same time, like when
Yeah,
they were much younger.
yeah. I know it's such a part of kind of what we do, and I think it is a problem. I mean, I've um had conversations with people lately about this, and I have more and more friends that getting into our 40s, like they're starting to realize this and they're starting to give it up and starting to try to drink less. And I think it's a point that people come to in their lives when you're like, what am I doing? So what kind of brought you to that point where you decided to stop?
Yeah, I think there was a few things. I'd had like the a year or two before I actually officially stopped, quote unquote, I had 6, 7 months off drinking, and it was great. And at the time, I was training for the London Marathon. And so I was like, I'm going to do it properly. I'm not going to drink because I knew that it wasn't going to be good, even practical to be able to drink whilst running
Yeah.
ridiculous miles every week and stuff, you know?
Hmm.
So I stopped and I didn't drink for ages. And then I unfortunately got injured and wasn't able to do the marathon. But my son was due to be born in May that year. So I decided to carry on. And then like it was under the premise that, well, I'm not drinking because if my partner goes into labor, I want to be able to take her to the hospital, all of these reasons. And then he was born, and I think like a month or two after that, and then I started drinking again. It was the summer, it was hot outside, yada yada yada.
Hmm.
And I started drinking again. And then I look back and I see I had all of these I had these reasons why I wasn't stopping drinking, but none of them were really very compelling. Like they were all very short term. And once those things had passed, like I didn't have much more to anchor myself onto. So then from then I started drinking again, except I didn't just drink this time. I was doing a lot more drugs because the hangovers from drinking alcohol were far worse than before I started because I'd had such a long spell of like detoxing from alcohol, 6, 7 months is pretty big. So yeah, and then it just kind of like spiraled and just got a little bit crazy out of control. And it was Boxing Day 2018. I went out to watch a soccer game here in the UK. We won the game. We went out to the pub afterwards. And this was Boxing Day, right? Like my family's at home. We had a brand new puppy, 1-year-old baby, my daughter, like, and I was in this pub and I was trying to buy drugs on Boxing Day and I was phoning all these people, asking people in the pub. I was sat with four mates on a table. I couldn't tell you anything about our conversation because I just wasn't present. I was just so fixated on like getting something else, even though I was like drinking loads as well.
Hmm.
And that night, I remember I left the pub. Thankfully, like didn't get anything, just didn't happen. And I woke up the next day on the sofa and just felt absolutely awful. And my partner came downstairs. I remember she just walked in. I was like, I can't do this to myself anymore. Like I've just had enough. Like this has to change. And that was it. And that was where the start of it all began, really. Like the true start, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, and I see so many parallels like in what you talk about with drinking to what my listeners struggle with binging is that like you find yourself doing these things and you're like, what am I doing? Like it seems like you
Mm,
rationally know this is not what you want, but you kind of keep finding yourself following those same habitual patterns, trying to get those same substances. And we could talk about probably forever the differences or the similarities between alcohol addiction or food addiction and how that all works in the brain. But I think ultimately both of them become a habit, and you also do become sort of dependent on the substances. And to reach that point where you say, okay, enough, like sometimes it does take getting to that low point. I mean, I know I was there, so many people I work with were there, and you just realize like I can't go on like this. So I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that. So when you like decided, okay, that's enough, how did you get started in giving it up? And then how did you stay sober?
yeah, great question. So I kind of already set the wheels in motion. I just hadn't realized. And I think because I probably woke up many times before and said those same things, like had enough of my own behavior.
Mhm.
But that morning it felt different. There was a lot more certainty in it. And I think I attribute that to reading This Naked Mind. So from the beginning of December, I think I started reading that book by Annie Grace and started learning about the brain, started learning about what alcohol really does. And so I'd already started that process of like rethinking what I was doing and why. So I think waking up that morning, I was like, I'm just done. And and then I just went on this journey, just like immersed myself in reading about all different but like some books like autobiographical but not autobiography books but books about people who'd stopped drinking. Some of them were like very factual, some of them were very um deep and like scary, right? Like some of the stuff that people get up to when they're drinking is horrifying. And I started having like flashbacks of stuff that I was doing when I was drinking, and I look back and I was like, everything that I've done in my life that I regret or wish hadn't happened, I could attribute to alcohol. And that was kind of sobering thought in and of itself, right? Because I was like, why would I want to keep doing this to myself? Like, it just didn't
Yeah.
make sense.
Yeah. Especially
So, yeah, that,
because alcohol kind of promises, well, you said, which is very intelligent, that alcohol doesn't promise anything, but the culture promises that alcohol
Yeah.
will do things for you and will help you and will help you, escape your problems and avoid your pain or celebrate or mourn or all these things. And it actually doesn't. And when you kind of wake up to that and realize like it really was not helping me with anything, it really was just harming me. I think it's a lot of the same realization that people who struggle with binging come to as well. Like, this is only hurting me, no matter what the culture says, no matter what my brain tells me. I know the truth because I've experienced it.
Yeah. And it's sad though, because, we see it all of the time, like how it's reinforced that, either alcohol or overeating is doing something for you. Binging is doing something for you.
Mhm.
I was watching a program with my partner very recently, and this is the first time I'd really seen it, and it was quite shocking. Is that there was these two people, and they were both having a hard time, and when they kind of like reached their threshold of feeling stressed, like one of them drank alcohol and he started secretly drinking, but the other one started binge eating, and you saw her going to the shop and buying loads of chocolates and crisps and stuff. And yeah, like we're getting those messages all of the time about like, well, this is what you do in those situations. So, and then couple that with, your environment growing up and all of those other things, like we end up with a lot of belief systems about what these substances, drugs are doing for us. Well,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, even foods can be drugs in a sense sometimes with the amount of
Yeah.
sugar in them.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we get the message that, okay, these behaviors, these substances help you cope because you are broken and you somehow can't cope. I quit binging, you quit alcohol, and here we are. Like, we've somehow learned how to cope. Like, you stopped drinking in basically a day. I stopped binging, very quickly as well. And it wasn't like, oh my gosh, suddenly I can't cope. It was actually like, wow, without binging in my life, I am open to learning how to cope in so many different ways that don't actually harm me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I went on a bit of a journey once I'd stopped drinking. So once I'd stopped drinking, I notice this a lot, right? Is when you take something out of your life, then you can sometimes replace it with something else. So it's
Mhm.
like alcohol went down and sugar went up, and then sugar went down and then coffee went up, and it's kind of like there's this yo-yo of different things that I get my dopamine kicks from and stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah, but it can happen really quickly, right? Like it can just come from a decision to not want to do it anymore and just to start arming yourself essentially with like education about what you're doing and why, because that's really powerful.
Oh yeah, I love that you mentioned that you sort of dove into all the things and reading about the people who overcame it and all the books. And you mentioned Annie Grace's book, which I've read and I loved as well. That really helps you. It really helps you keep it in the front of your mind. It reminds you of all the reasons that you want to stop. It gives you examples of people who have done it. So that's a helpful reminder, whether the listeners are struggling with alcohol or food, that when you focus on stopping, you need some extra reinforcement. Like, sometimes it's not enough to say, okay, I'm just done. Like, you need to really dive into it and make sure that you stay conscious and you stay aware and you stay, connected to that part of yourself that made that decision.
Yeah. It's an analogy I've used with my guys when I'm helping them stop drinking, but you could use this for any kind of addiction or habit if you like as well. It's like you've got this room, right? I call it the drinker's dungeon. And in this drinker's dungeon, you've got all of the reasons that you drink, all of your past experiences, all of those things that you've received through conditioning, what parents have told you, carers have told you, friends have told you, whatever, right? Like it's pretty stacked. It's like a library full of resources as to why you drink. And then I say, well, imagine you've got like this other room. It's called your sober suite. And in there, it's just this blank canvas. And it's your job to go in there and fill that room up with all of these other new reasons, new experiences of why you no longer want alcohol in your life. And whether that's through the reading, the podcast, all of those different things like sober first, going out and not drinking for the first time, right? Like gathering all of that data, all of that evidence that you can do this.
Well, yeah, it's like rewiring your thoughts around it, because previously,
Yeah.
when you're so stuck in alcohol, you think, oh, this is great. This is what I need. And you don't really know that there's an alternative. So it's about really learning what that alternative is and seeing the benefits of that. And that helps reinforce it. So that's really helpful. Okay, so you mentioned something that I want to dive into a little more about how when you drinking went down, kind of your eating went up or your sugar intake went up and then coffee went up. And I
Yeah.
think that really goes back to sort of our brain's natural desire for pleasure. We have this natural reward center and dopamine and fuels our desire for pleasure. So like you take away one form of pleasure and you might be seeking it elsewhere. How were you able to sort of rein that in and come to a more balanced place?
Well, that's how I came across you, Kathryn.
Oh.
So yeah, right. Like I didn't really know what was happening at the time. Like as far as I knew, it was like I found out about the alcohol, but I wasn't aware it was showing up in other places for me as well. So when I stopped drinking, I would find myself going down to the local supermarket and just buying like a pack of biscuits, packet of sweets, like big bag of crisps, like whatever, right? And then I started doing it in secret as well. And I noticed that, and I'd feel terrible the next day, right? Like almost like having a hangover from the food that I'd eaten. And then I'd promise myself I wouldn't do it. And then it'd just keep showing up for me. And eventually I just I got fed up with that. And I was looking for like, okay, so I need to arm myself with some education around this. And that's when I found out about brain over binge. And again, I was like, oh, okay, like this is fascinating because there are so many similarities, but your approach was even a little bit different as well. So reading that again just helped to really reinforce, like, okay, yeah, this isn't me, right? Like that word you used, neurological junk, right? Like it was such a great way to be able to almost step back and just watch my own brain doing what it's doing instead of just being driven by it the whole time. And again, like now I'm stopping coffee as well. I stopped drinking coffee like over a week ago, and it's great. I had a bit of a headache for most of yesterday, but today I feel so much better for it. And I think that's what we've got to remember with some of these things is like the first week or two, they're going to feel a little bit up and down for sure.
Yeah.
And because when you are especially drinking and eating a lot of sugary foods, like the amount of dopamine that is getting released in your brain is not normal. It's not
Mhm.
what we are used to as human beings. It's not the function of why we have dopamine in the first place. So when I stopped, I felt very low for a couple of months, right? And I remember because my partner, we just got a new dog, as I mentioned, and my partner goes, "Oh, are you happy now? You got everything you want." And I felt far from happy. Like I didn't feel happy at all. And again, it's because I'd been getting so much artificial dopamine, if you want, from drinking, and it made me feel very low because I wasn't able to get the same kind of pleasures out of life. And that's when I was trying to use sugar as a way to replace that for myself.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's just again, like just being aware of that and knowing that is helpful because then you can go, okay, so again, this isn't a me problem. This is just like the way my brain is wired and how I can work with it is important.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And then you kind of can accept feeling temporarily lower. Like you know what's happening. You don't feel that need to go chase other pleasures because you're like, okay, my brain's just getting used to just being normal, and normal has its benefits. Like you said, you build that sober suite and you learn that like, gosh, this is so much better to be like my actual self and not be constantly following these sort of primitive drives.
Yeah, and it's the amount of energy you waste on it is like it's so time consuming thinking
Mhm.
about it, doing it, feeling bad about doing it, and then thinking about not doing it. It just
Yeah.
it eats up so much of your time and energy sometimes.
Yeah. And you learn to find pleasure in normal things, healthy amounts. You learn to find pleasure in things that don't harm you. And it's actually like a much more satisfying pleasure. It's like true satisfaction instead of this fleeting pleasure that ultimately leads to pain.
Yeah, absolutely. It is short-term pleasure, long-term pain.
Yeah. So how has your life, like, let's talk about your sober suite. How has your life improved? What have you discovered about yourself? How have you learned to, have pleasure in your life? But basically, like, how has stopping alcohol improved who you are today?
Yeah. Oh man, there's so many different reasons. And I think in that first year, my sober suite consisted of I think it was about 3 months in, we went to my partner and I, we went to someone's birthday party. And it was the first time I think I'd properly been out.
Mhm.
I went out and everyone was drinking around me. And I knew I didn't want to drink, but I did feel a bit kind of awkward and isolated. there was this point about 10:30, 11 at night. Everyone's absolutely wasted by this point. And the DJ started playing some music that I really liked. And the dance floor wasn't really that busy. And I went on the dance floor and I started dancing, and they played this particular track that I'd loved and danced to many, many times before. And I just gave myself permission to have fun, and I just let myself go. And I just, was dancing and had a lot of fun. And I was like, wow, if I could do that, if I could enjoy that in this place, like that's huge for me.
Yeah.
And then having done that, I ended up going to a wedding that year. I ended up going to a festival and not drinking for the whole weekend. Like I started doing all of these things that had been a big part of my life, but now still big part of my life, but just experiencing them in such a different and unique way. So that was really cool. But all this time, all of this energy that I'd recouped from not drinking alcohol, I started just plowing into my career and what I wanted to do. Because a big part of why I stopped was because one, I recognized like I was turning into someone I didn't want to be. I had young children, like I didn't want to be that kind of role model to my kids. And two, I felt fairly stagnant, like I wasn't really doing anything. I was in a job that was paying, but I wasn't anyway inclined to like advance in it or particularly happy in it. And I wanted to get back to coaching. I was like, I'm just gonna give it another go, because I'd actually learned how to coach like 4 or 5 years previously. So I just committed to doing that. And then I just, through a process of, continuing personal development and getting coached and learning about myself, I was able to like radically change my life. Whereas now, like I'm full-time coach, like that's all I do, coach many people, helping them with not just with alcohol, but also all sorts of other things as well. So it's been huge. With my kids, like I'm much more patient, and not 100% of the time because I'm human.
Yeah, me too.
But the other thing, like that first year, because we had a puppy, man, like it was just a crazy time to stop drinking in my head, right? Like a brand new baby or year-old
Yeah.
baby and a puppy, but like it had to be done because there is no right time. Like you can't just wait around for the stars to align. Sometimes it's just like it's got to be now.
Yeah.
So yeah, lots of things have changed, and where I get pleasure now is like just even now, right? Like I planted loads of wildflowers outside of my office window, and I love just looking out, and I can see the sun coming through the leaves, and it leaves a reflection. Like those things just bring me so much joy. Whereas before, I wouldn't even have noticed them.
Yeah. And I feel like it opens you up to be able to do so much more in your career. Like you mentioned in parenting, you also said like, oh, it seemed like a crazy time to stop drinking with a new puppy and a new baby. And like, but really, isn't that a crazy time to keep drinking? Because it
Yeah,
makes
exactly.
it makes you so much less able to deal with things. People will say that with binging too. Like I have so much going on in my life. And it's like, well, then this is the perfect time because then you can focus on your life and not be so distracted and weighed down by the food.
Yeah. And just waking up on a weekend and just having like the whole weekend to do what I
Yeah.
want to do is quite incredible, because I don't think I appreciated how much time I did lose through being hungover, or in then being hungover, but then drinking the thing that was making me feel bad to feel better, which is
Mhm.
just complete paradox, right? And it's a bit like binge eating as well, right? Like you eat the thing to feel better, but it's the binge eating that's probably making you feel like you don't want to eat in the
Worse.
first place.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, I love that you mentioned like having the whole weekend to do what you want, because if you drink and you're hungover, you lose a lot of that next day. You can't accomplish the things you want to accomplish. You can't take care of the people you need to take care of. And I just think, yeah, whether you're giving up alcohol, whether you're giving up binging, you need to see it as an opportunity to be able to put that energy into the things that matter to you. I want to talk to you about like how you see yourself today as far as like a lot of people say, oh, alcohol is a disease, alcoholism is a disease, you'll never get over it. You'll always have this inside of you. If you have one sip, you're going to be down the, slippery slope to drinking every day again. So how do you see that as far as like managing your sobriety going forward?
Oh, I mean, if people want to believe that, that's fine, right? Like that's up to them. But for me, that's just nonsense.
Yeah.
Like I have zero desire to drink. Like I cannot think of anything worse. And I was working with one of my clients the other week, and we were talking about like his sober toolkit, and he said, "Oh, like your podcast is therapeutic for you," and I was like, "Yeah, it is." because I am constantly talking to people about rethinking their relationship with alcohol, and I'm always seeing evidence of why I wouldn't want to drink, right? Like if I go out and I'm noticing people drinking and like notice how the tone changes as the night goes on and stuff, and I'm just like, I'm so glad I'm away from that. And for
Yeah.
me, it's just I couldn't think of anything worse, and I can't think of any circumstance that I'd ever want to go, oh, I need to have a drink, because I wouldn't experience life, like I did a lot of my years just numbing out and trying to escape, thinking that I was having fun. I think there's like this tipping point of where you probably are having fun, but like you become dependent on it to have fun. And for me, like that's a real telltale sign that there's dependency at foot,
Yeah.
afoot.
Yeah, that's interesting. I feel like my boyfriend and I have had conversations about this recently. It's like the anticipation of alcohol is always so much better than like it actually is. Like your brain will tell you, "Oh, it's going to be so good," and you start talking about it, and people are excited about going out. We're gonna have so much fun, and like maybe the first drink might be okay, but then like, it's just like isn't ever as good as your brain tells you it's going to be. Did that happen to you?
Yeah, often. And this is something that my clients say as well, right? It's that weekend mentality comes up quite a lot, or weekend mindset, right? Like getting
Mhm.
excited for the weekend and thinking about it. And then like you have that drink and then it kind of you never reach that kind of pinnacle again, right? Like you're always
Yeah.
chasing it, which is why you end up drinking more and more and more and just feel terrible and terrible and terrible.
Yeah. And I think I wanted to say that because I wanted to make the connection between what you said about no longer having that desire. And you think that you can't even think of anything worse. And I think when you have that shift, whatever habit we're talking about here is when you truly start feeling confident in your sobriety. You feel like it's authentic, I guess, to you. It's not like you're forcing yourself to do it. It's not like someone else is making you do it. This is like, this is what I want. And I can't imagine ever going back.
Yeah. And that was the difference between the first time I had an extended break and now, right? Like that first time, I was using other things in my life to say I'm not going to drink. So what I saw that as is willpower, right? Like I was saying, well, I'm not going to drink until this point. But then that point came and went. And then I was like, oh, what am I going to do now? Right. But what it did show me, there was this nudge, there was this kind of sense that this isn't what I want anymore. But I just wasn't armed with the tools and resources to help me radically rethink alcohol. Whereas now, yeah, I just honestly, I stick to my guns here. Like I couldn't think of anything worse. Just I don't even like getting a cold now, Kathryn, right? Because the next day, or like feeling ill, it
Yeah.
doesn't feel good. Like I know when I
Yeah.
feel ill, and I think sometimes when you're drinking, you get so used to feeling how you feel, right? Like probably like a fairly low state that you
Mhm.
think that's normal. But once you stop drinking, and after a while, sometimes it takes a few weeks, sometimes it can take longer, but you start to kind of feel how your body is designed to feel normally, and that's
Mhm.
amazing. So yeah, it's very, very different.
Yeah, for sure. And I think as what I experienced and what, several of my friends are kind of going through at this point is realizing that like your body really can't even tolerate it anymore after a certain age. Like I think when you're younger, you feel invincible. And as you get older and older, makes you feel worse and worse. Like I don't drink very much at all, and I never really have. But if I do have a drink now, I notice I just feel like awful. Like one drink, I feel terrible the next day. It lowers my mood, it increases my anxiety sometimes. Like, so I've recently in the past, probably like 9 months or so, just like really don't drink much at all. I might have like one drink a month, and I just have no desire to do it.
And my mum's the same. Like she'll have one drink and she'll feel terrible the next day, and it's almost like, what's the point? Like,
Yeah.
do you is the cost worth the no, is the benefit worth the cost, right? I talk
Yeah.
about alcohol ROI. Like the return on investment on drinking alcohol usually isn't that good.
Yeah.
Like it's pretty poor returns. One of the things as well as you were sharing that, I noticed that I hadn't really put down to alcohol at the time was heartburn, right? I don't get heartburn now, rarely ever,
Mhm.
but I used to get it quite a lot when I was drinking alcohol, but I never thought it was because of alcohol. Getting like red skin, like my face would get very hot, very red sometimes when I'd been drinking for days on end. That's because my poor liver was like full to the brim of like trying to flush out all of these toxins out of me. And yeah, just generally feeling better, like not waking up in the morning and aching. Like there's all of these things
Yeah.
that I hadn't expected that were going to happen when I stopped drinking, that were just added bonuses as well.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And it just allows you then to be able to manage your life. Like sometimes I think like life is so hard anyway. Like I have 4 kids and a job and like so much going on that just to throw alcohol on top of that, it just like wipes me out to not be able to do all the things that I need to do. And I'd so much rather be able to focus on my life. So yeah, I just think all of this that you're sharing is super helpful. The
Just
next
an
oh,
analogy that comes up, sorry, Kathryn, as
no,
you
you're
say that,
good.
right?
You're great.
It's like having a fire, like, and imagining like that fire is like how you're feeling or whatever, but you're trying to put it out, but you're chucking alcohol on it.
Mhm.
And what's going to happen if you chuck alcohol on a fire?
It's going to
It's
get
gonna,
worse, a lot worse.
yeah, it's going to get worse, right? So yeah,
Yeah, like you think, oh, this is going to help. No, it doesn't
yeah.
help. So I think, yeah, that's super helpful. And you mentioned Annie Grace's book, and I've had a conversation again with my boyfriend about this book, and he loved it too. One thing that both of us take issue with is like she says, like you really don't enjoy the taste, and both of us are like, yeah, I kind of do like the taste of certain alcohols. I really love like cocktails and like drinks like that. So when I go out now, I'll order like a non-alcoholic cocktail or he'll order a non-alcoholic beer. And like actually we do enjoy the taste. So I'm interested to hear your opinion on substituting non-alcoholic drinks that still taste good and give you pleasure as sort of a substitute for the actual alcohol.
Yeah. Well, two things come to mind for me there, right? Like, let's address the tasting first.
Mm-hmm.
So I think when she says that, for me, what comes up is I didn't enjoy the taste when I first started drinking. I didn't
Yeah.
enjoy the taste when I first started smoking. I didn't enjoy coffee when I first started drinking it, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
none of those things actually tasted that great. But over time, like I trained myself to like them, to desire them, to actually to enjoy the taste of them. And so there is something in that. I mean, I think now you might enjoy the taste, but if you was to start drinking now from the very first time, it might be a very different experience. Who knows?
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember teaching myself to smoke. It was horrendous.
Yeah, and then
But
people
like, how
learn to like
crazy is
it.
that? Teaching myself to smoke, like as a
Ugh,
teenager. Yeah,
yeah. Which scares me
horrible.
too, like, I have teenagers now, and, like, they have improved the taste of these things, the different
Oh,
things that
they're
you can
like
drink.
candy.
I know, and it's really scary, like, how we even learned to like the taste of things that tasted awful, but, like, yeah, that it's so much easier, I think, to get hooked on that taste now.
Yeah, and for me growing up, this is still related, really. It's like for me growing up, beer, I probably tried it and I wasn't a massive fan, but like in the 90s, it was also the boom of like alcopops. So you'd
Mhm.
have like Smirnoff Ice, which just was lemonade
Yeah.
alcohol basically, or Hooch, which was orange alcohol. Like there was all of these drinks that were just like massively
Mhm.
sweetened in order to make them palatable. And then of course, like that was it's almost like the gateway to lead on to drink other drinks. Like I never used to like whiskeys or rums and stuff because they were very strong, but over time I taught myself to like them.
Mhm.
So with regards to zero beers or no low beers, like anything under 0.5, they were a huge part of my recovery.
Mhm.
Like I would drink them. I would drink them when I went out. I found them really helpful. And you know, the alcohol in them, like there's more alcohol in a overripe banana than there is in a can of 0.5 lager or
Mhm.
IPA or whatever, for example. That said, I think it really depends on the person drinking them. Like, so I know some of my guys who drink them, and it makes them want to have a regular beer if you want.
Mhm.
So it really depends. But for me, I found them really helpful. I drink them every now and again, and I do like the taste of them. It's weird. I like the taste of the pale ale ones now, whereas I never used to like pale ale lagers when I was drinking alcohol. So it's like I don't know how you explain that.
Yeah.
Again, maybe it's just like I've had enough of them to train my brain to like them, right? But I think they could be really helpful too, and I think it all depends on the person drinking them and how what if they trigger you in the sense that they make you want to drink stronger
Yeah.
proof alcohol or not.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hear you saying it's sort of an individual decision, and it's not a bad thing if you decide to have non-alcoholic beers to sort of get you over the hump, or if that's just what you like going forward. Like if you want to go out and kind of feel like you're still a part of the crowd and have a drink in your hand, then I don't think it's a bad thing. I know I certainly do it, so I appreciate you weighing in on that.
One thing like I would advise as well is to be mindful of the zero beers. Like they have sugar in them
Mhm,
sometimes, or a lot of the time, right? Some of them are very, very small traces, but some of them actually have quite a lot of sugar in them.
mhm,
So not only are you now like not drinking, but you're also like replacing it for a sugary drink. So
mhm.
just if you do choose to go have zero beers or whatever, just like check in or check the labels and see how much sugar in them, because again, like that could be something else that makes you want to have more and more, right? It could be one of those things where you stop drinking, but then have tons of zero beers.
Yeah, it makes
I
sense too, and I think too for people who listen to the show and eating some sugar tends to make them crave more sugar, it
yeah,
is something just to be mindful of.
yeah,
And there's
absolutely.
things you can have like club soda with lime and things like that that don't have as much sugar that you can still have a drink if you're out. So
I mean, that's my favorite drink.
mhm. It's great, I
Fresh
know.
lime, and yeah, it's just so good.
So, we talked about the non-alcoholic beers. What do you feel about moderation? For someone who has struggled with alcohol like yourself. I mean, for me, I do drink, maybe once a month, but I've
Hmm.
never struggled with alcohol. So it's not a problem for me. It kind of reminds me of why I don't like to drink. So for someone like you, like, do you think you'll ever get to a point where you do have a drink? I mean, it doesn't seem like it based on your feelings about it, but for other people, what do you feel? How do you feel about moderation?
Yeah, and this is a conversation that comes up fairly often. And
Mhm.
my honest opinion and philosophy is just it's easier not to.
Yeah.
It's just like why put yourself through it? Like if you had this codependency on alcohol, then it's just easier not to drink. That said, like it is possible to moderate, but I think the results that people get from moderation are very low. I heard a statistic the other day of like 5% of people who no 95% of people who want to moderate can't, right?
Okay.
Like they try it and then they fail at it and stuff. I don't exactly know where that statistic came from, but just to give you a sense, I think it depends on what your relationship to alcohol is, of like why you've been drinking it and using it and what you think it's doing for you. You can, like you can train your prefrontal cortex, your higher brain, to be in discharge. Something we talk about is decide a day ahead, right? Like if you're going to drink, well, make that decision the day before. Never make a decision in the moment, because
Mhm.
that's often when the lower brains want to try and rule the roost.
Yeah, for sure. And once you do have a drink, it lowers your inhibitions, it lowers your
Yep.
self-control. So it's much easier to say, oh, I'll just have another and another. And then before you know it, you're kind of down a path you don't want to be down.
Yeah, exactly. That's the scary thing about it, right? Is that when you start drinking, as you know, your decision making goes down. Like you
Mhm.
start losing your inhibitions. So that that control that you're wanting or looking for, like, is not going to be so much available, because now alcohol is just kind of in your system and changing your brain, literally changing your brain.
Yeah. And that leads me into something I want to ask you because I do tell people who struggle with binging, like, hey, you might want to look at your alcohol because a lot of people find that when they do drink, they end up binging because of that lower inhibition, because their self control doesn't, they feel like, whatever, I don't even care anymore. I'm just going to binge. And so they end up in a space where they're not only hungover, they've had a binge and they feel awful from that. So my question for you is like, do you agree with that? Like when you're trying to stop a habit, let's say like binging, is it best to refrain from alcohol as well so that you do have access to that self-control function in your brain?
I think it would definitely help, yeah, because you think about, it's all about that dopamine, right? Like if you're stopping binging, but then you're still drinking, well, you're still kind of activating that same neural pathway system in your brain.
Mhm.
So if you can take a break, which is my philosophy when it comes to stopping drinking, actually, is just take a break and just give yourself a chance to reset, because that's when you can start doing that reprogramming in the brain as well. So yeah, I think taking a break is best, because otherwise you just kind of, as I shared earlier, right? Like you just go into this loop of like one thing after another. Like you might lose one, but you'll pick up another one. So
Mhm.
if you can kind of break that chain, if you like, then that's going to be far more beneficial for you in the long run. And it's going to feel uncomfortable, right? Like, and it's going to take a little bit of work, but it's going to be so worth it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with you. And, you don't have to solve everything in your life at one time, but if you're trying to
No.
stop a habit like binging or habit that's really taking over your life, and alcohol is only fueling that, like it can be really helpful to give up the alcohol for a short time or forever.
Yeah. I think that's definitely the best practice. But having said that, sometimes guys I work with, they notice that when they stop drinking, that their sugar intake goes up.
Hmm.
And sometimes it might be a bit too much to try and work on both of those things at the same time. So what we kind of look at is go, okay, so even though we're probably eating a bit more sugar than we want to, let's remove alcohol first and all of those other associations with it, and then let's work on this sugar thing next.
Yeah.
Because that's going to be far more beneficial than just trying to like stop everything all at once sometimes, because then that's when the brain goes into deprivation mode and can lead to binges.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of taking each individual into account and figuring out what's the most problematic thing. Some people find that alcohol really doesn't actually increase their binging. So it's really about learning your own patterns, learning,
Yeah.
what you need, what each person needs.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone's unique. Everyone's got their own ways of doing things. And again, it's about having tools in place for yourself, right? Like when you stop drinking or stop binging, what are you going to do with that time where you might have invested in doing those activities, right? Like
Mhm.
what whether that's like I've been doing mindfulness coloring in recently, not to stop anything, just because I've been enjoying doing it, right? Like just some other activity to keep yourself present and with yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, it just opens you up to discovering all those things. And you don't have to
Mhm.
know right away. I think you can discover them over time. Some people think, oh, I don't know who I'm going to be without drinking. I don't know what I'm going to do without binging. So then they keep drinking or they keep binging. But it's really letting go of those behaviors that allows you to then figure it out.
Yeah, right. Like that's part of the fun.
Hmm.
Like that is the journey, is discovering like what you do want to do and what you would love to try in life.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Patrick, this has all been very helpful. I love this conversation. I feel like I could talk about it for so long because it's very interesting to me, and you're just a very helpful guest. So where can people learn more about you if they want to, rethink their relationship with alcohol?
Yeah, thanks. Been an absolute delight. So if anyone is interested to learn more about me or what I do, you can visit patrickjfox.com. That's my website, or listen to the podcast, the Alcohol Rethink podcast. And you can find me on Instagram, which is the Alcohol Rethink Project.
Awesome. And I'll include all those links in the show description. And thank you so much, Patrick, for your time. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Kathryn. And I appreciate everyone here who's listening right now as well.